Well, howdy there, Internet people. It's Bo again. So tonight we're going to talk about Bernie and his supporters and misunderstanding his supporters because of something that came up during the debates. The nomination process came up, and I realized that the Democratic establishment is grossly misunderstanding Bernie's supporters. To get into that, and to provide a real clear comparison, I'm going to tell you about my views on food security. I'm a huge proponent of proactive measures when it comes to food security. I think that at low-income housing, all of the landscaping should be edible. I think it should be fruit trees and berry bushes. I think raised beds should be everywhere. I think when you walk around town and you see those decorative trees in the sidewalk, that they should be fruit trees. I think that there should be a place where people can go to get seeds and compost and stuff like that. I think that if we're going to have a government this expansive, call me crazy, it should promote the general welfare. I think that was an idea that was tossed out at one point. That's my position. It's my actual position. We don't have any of that. None of that's reality. The reality is we have EBT. Fine. It's compromise. It's not what I want. It's not radical enough for me, but sure. Okay. Every once in a while, I run into somebody who's like, we need to get rid of all those programs. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. Fine. Do it. Because frankly, you don't have the stones. Because I know that there's not a country on this planet that is more than 3 days worth of missed meals away from revolution. Go for it. Go for it. Starve the poor. That's what you do. See how that works out for you. And I leave the conversation. There's no sense in continuing it because they don't have the base of knowledge to engage in it. So, you have the position, the radical position. You have the compromise, and then you have the extreme that you just can't deal with. Those are 3 points on this scale. There are other points in between, but those are the 3 we're going to be talking about. Okay, so how does this relate to Bernie? There are millions of Americans who want deep systemic change, that hold radical ideas, proactive food security measures. Here's the part that the Democratic Party does not understand. To them, Bernie is the compromise. He's EBT. He's not the radical position. The Democratic Party doesn't understand this. The establishment doesn't understand this because they don't know their constituents. They don't talk to them anymore. They talk to lobbyists. The idea that Bernie is too radical is kind of laughable on a lot of levels. So, actual position, Bernie the compromise, and then Bloomberg as an example. No point in continuing the conversation. The reason this becomes important is because of that bit about how the nomination is conducted. There's 2 ways that can go. If Bernie walks in and he does not have the lead, he doesn't have the mass of supporters, he doesn't have the most delegates, he doesn't have a plurality of support, and the Democratic establishment chooses to go with another candidate, most of them will still get a pretty big chunk of Bernie's supporters. Not all of them, because some of them, they're just Trump light. But many will look at it in the sense of harm reduction. This candidate, not radical enough for me, not even a decent compromise, but better than Trump. That's how some of them will look at it. However, if he walks in to that convention and he has the lead and has the most delegates and has a plurality of support, and the Democratic establishment uses superdelegates or some other means to take the nomination from him and give it to somebody else, they will leave the conversation. Because all that does is reinforce the idea that there is no compromise. We have to have deep systemic change or nothing. And they will take it and they will look at it and they will understand that if they refuse to support whoever the candidate is, that more than likely we'll get 4 more years of Trump. And those 4 more years of Trump, because of his habit of wanting to publicly punish the marginalized for the humor of his base, will take those marginalized people and radicalize them even further. Past the compromise, past Bernie. That's how they'll look at it. They'll stay home. Now, there's still a chance that a lot of Democratic candidates can beat Trump without their support. But remember, they were certain they could in 2016. And when Bernie supporters en masse went third party or just stayed home, it handed the election to Trump. They will do it again. Because to them, Bernie is the compromise, not the radical position. That's the missing part. That's the part that the DNC just doesn't seem to get. The idea that the Democratic establishment looks at Bernie and says he's too far left, he's too radical, all that shows is that the Democratic Party has gone right, hard. Bernie is not a leftist. He's not. He's more left than a lot of candidates, but he's not a leftist. He's not a radical. The radicals who support him do so out of compromise. And I know there are people who are saying, so they'll stay home and they'll let those marginalized people just be further victimized by Trump. That's coming from a position of privilege. That's ableist. That's accelerationist. Yeah, it's all of those things. And they will do it. Just because it's those things doesn't mean that people aren't thinking that way. Historically, this scenario has played out many times. In the early 1900s in Ireland, the Irish resistance brought the British Empire to its knees. And the British wanted a little compromise. And one group within the Irish resistance, they're like, no, that's too much. We're not doing it. We're not giving up the North. And civil war followed. More recently, it happened in China. The rulers didn't know their constituents because they didn't talk to them. A group of young people who wanted deep systemic change took to the streets. Bam, China's under martial law. I don't think it would get that serious this time. But if failure to even get to the compromise continues, yeah, that's the route it'll go. It'll eventually head that direction. I don't think it's this election or the next, but that's the direction it will head. Because as the party that is supposed to be the left-leaning party in the U.S. moves further right, understand the real progressives, the real radicals, they continue to progress. And they come up with new ideas that aren't being embraced out of fear of appearing to be too radical. When at this point, Bernie is really just advocating the stuff that pretty much every other Western nation has. It's not radical. And the Democratic Party calling it that further feeds people to the right. There are a whole bunch of people who will take the opportunity to radicalize the marginalized with 4 more years of Trump over Bloomberg, Trump light. There are a couple other candidates who could probably count on getting some support from Bernie, from his supporters, but not many, because he is the compromise, not the radical. I think the best thing that the Democratic Party could do during the nomination is be democratic. I think anything other than that is going to lead to issues. Anyway, it's just a thought. Y'all have a good night.